So, Sean, can you give me some predictions about the media landscape over the next 5 years?
Sure. 5 years is certainly I think a long time in the sense that a lot can change. A lot happens in 5 years. 5 years ago, we had just founded Uyala, and over the course of time, of those 5 years, Uyala now reaches nearly 200 million individual users across a very large publisher base. I think if we look at 5 years ago, online video was maybe 0.5% of all video consumption. 5 years from now, it'll very likely be 50% of all video consumption. And that represents a very significant shift in the overall market. I think what happens as a result of that is video becomes a very personalized experience. When I turn on my TV, I'm getting an experience that's custom tailored towards me. It's different content, different ads, different overall experience when I turn on my device. Again, it's going to be very personalized, not only to me, but that individual screen. What we're also going to find is that ultimately, very similar content I consume in an offline world, in my broadcast world today, is still going to exist and still be the primary form of consumption. Very different than a lot of the early adopters in the industry, which were more short form user-generated content. We'll see this whole migration, but it will be in a much more personalized fashion. We'll be moving from a linear world to where we're at now, which is much more of an on-demand world, ultimately back to the personalized linear world. And I think it's very safe to say that half of all of our consumption will truly be over IP and online.
Recently, a figure came out saying that 98% of all video is still consumed through television. Where do you see the future of television?
So I think the numbers we see and the numbers from companies like ComScore indicate that it would be more than that based on ComScore data. If you look at the number of hours consumed, it looks to be closer to 9% as of January.
Online.
And this is largely based off the assumption also that the average American spends approximately 5 hours a day watching video. Where this ultimately goes, and I think what it means for television, is business models will change to a certain extent. I think the trends that we see happening is first, now that there's a decoupling of distribution medium and service provider layers, it means that there's more competition for the consumer. I now no longer have to put a satellite into orbit to reach my consumers. What that means is you get the introduction of more virtual MSOs. You have content creators now with the ability to go direct to consumer. And what this is ultimately creating is a little bit of a land grab for the consumer. We're not making any more new consumers, at least not at any exciting rate. The consumers are watching more and more content. We're going to see this 5 hours a day eventually grow to 6 and 7 hours a day as we displace other forms of entertainment and information sharing. But where all the real competition and growth happens is around the race for the consumer eyeballs in this online world. So I think what ultimately happens to video, the consumer gets access to more content. Fortunately for the content distributors, it's monetized better. I think we actually see a growth in the overall industry, not just in consumption volume, but actually in the overall ability to monetize this content. I'm not convinced yet that we will see an increase in pay-per-view and subscription-based revenue. I think we already see the consumers more or less at their capacity as far as a willingness to pay for content, but the huge promise with video and television in general, because we see this all as a single industry, the huge promise is they can ultimately monetize content much better in an advertising-driven world because I get to personalize that consumer. The 170 million households today that I'm broadcasting and giving a non-personalized consumption experience in the linear world to, in the future of television, I now can have this one-to-one conversation with each and every consumer that ultimately helps me analyze the consumption experience to better personalize and better monetize that. And so I think the future adage that we'll have is it'll be digital dollars and analog dimes. The steps on how we get there is going to largely be driven by how well can we personalize the experience for each and every consumer that lets us take advantage, as I mentioned, of this one-to-one relationship.
There was a book written a few years ago called Bowling Alone, and this sounds to me like the era of viewing alone.
We're seeing that there's a significant shift in thinking for many of our content publishers. I think that the thing that we have to be very cognizant and understanding of is video is, by definition, broadcast and a one-to-many experience. I think what oftentimes happens is in the online world, outside of video, but as online technology providers look to video, we always think of the world as a one-to-one, and there is this migration and this change in thinking around how we have to ultimately personalize content. But that also comes with a bit of a loss of control. As I move to this one-to-one world, as I provide great content discovery and content recommendation algorithms, as I give each and every consumer the ability to be delivered a different ad, I, as a media publisher, am actually losing control of some of my content experience. And that's fundamentally different than how the industry has operated for a very long time. And I think the onus is on the technology and platform providers like Uyala to actually help facilitate that transition in safe, controlled, and successful ways. So for example, when we talk about automation, systems like our content discovery engine, it isn't just about fully automating. It's around controlled automation, the ability to put certain boundaries and levers around these systems such that you control the number of users they affect while you actually are able to prove out the efficacy of those platforms, or to be able to override them. Content discovery is fantastic, but we have publishers who, when a video is being played on their homepage, they don't want an automated engine. They want a custom and carefully curated set of results. And so it's around providing the right controls and the right safeguards to essentially ensure that we have this successful transition in how we approach the industry and how we approach this personalization of the experience for the consumer, which is fundamentally a very significant shift in thinking.
In this shift more towards online video and the change in the business model, to my knowledge, CPMs in television and the current linear model are higher than those online. You're talking about a huge shift in the business model. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, historically they have been. What we're seeing, however, is as premium content moves online, it's actually starting to get higher CPMs. A good example would be the Super Bowl this year actually received a higher CPM on the order of, I believe, an 80% increase for online versus offline. So we're seeing this shift largely following significant volumes of content consumption coming online and that content being of more premium form as opposed to more user-generated content or mid-form kinds of content.
So would you say that in the next 5 years that the actual CPM levels will be close from linear to online?
I think they can not only be close, I think they can actually be higher. In the online world, we have that ability to combat the half of my advertising dollars are working, I just don't know which half. We can get much more targeted, much more personalized. It's around upping our level of sophistication, essentially, to get there. So I firmly believe that in the online world, we can do better than the classic offline model. It just takes better data and ultimately better personalization to provide the value to the consumer and the appropriate proof points to advertisers to drive these increased CPMs.